The Desert of New Mexico, July 16, 1945, 5:29 a.m. The world holds its breath, though it doesn't know it yet. A countdown, clinical and cold, echoes in a concrete bunker. Outside, in the pre-dawn darkness of a place codenamed Trinity, a strange metallic gadget sits atop a 100-foot steel tower, a bizarre idol awaiting a terrible baptism. The final seconds tick away, and then silence is replaced by creation. Not a sound at first, just a light brighter than 1,000 suns, a light that turns the desert night into a day more brilliant than any noon. A silent, terrifyingly beautiful ball of fire blossoms in the sky, painting the mountains purple and gold. It rises, a furious, self-consuming star. Seconds later, the sound arrives, not a bang, but a physical roar that shakes the earth, a sound that feels like the planet itself is screaming. In the observation bunker, men who understood the very fabric of the universe are struck with a primal religious awe. But one man, the architect of this apocalypse, a slender figure with piercing blue eyes, does not celebrate. As he watches the fire of his creation climb towards the heavens, a single, terrible line from an ancient Hindu scripture echoes in his soul, a line that would become both his legacy and his curse. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. This is not just the story of the atomic bomb. It is the story of the man who built it and the man it broke. This is the story of a genius who, in a desperate race to save the world, gave humanity the power to destroy it, and was haunted by his success for the rest of his life. This is J. Robert Oppenheimer. He was not born a destroyer. He was a child of immense privilege and profound strangeness. Born in 1904 in New York City, Robert Oppenheimer grew up in a world of art, culture, and intense intellectual pressure. He was a prodigy, reading philosophy in Greek and Latin as a child, but he was also a deeply troubled young man, painfully thin, socially awkward, and plagued by severe depression. He was a paradox, a mind that could soar through the highest levels of theoretical physics, trapped in an emotional state that was fragile and unstable. His time at Harvard and Cambridge were marked by both brilliance and turmoil, including a disturbing incident where he left a poisoned apple for a tutor, a dark hint of the volatility beneath the genius. He eventually found his footing in the burgeoning world of quantum physics in Europe, returning to America as a scientific star. At Berkeley and Caltech, he built legendary physics departments, his students adoringly calling him Oppie. He was a charismatic, chain-smoking aesthete who loved poetry as much as physics, a man of jarring contradictions who had finally found his stage. But while Oppenheimer was exploring the secrets of the atom, the world outside was descending into darkness. In 1938, in Nazi Germany, the discovery of nuclear fission changed everything. The terrifying implication was immediately understood by scientists worldwide. A chain reaction could create a bomb of unimaginable power. The discovery had been made in the heart of Hitler's Reich. A sense of absolute terror gripped the community of refugee scientists who had fled to America. At their urging, Albert Einstein signed a letter to President Franklin Roosevelt, warning of the danger and recommending that the U.S. start its own atomic research program. The race had begun. The American effort, codenamed the Manhattan Project, was a colossal undertaking. The military man in charge, General Leslie Groves, was a gruff, no-nonsense engineer. He needed a scientific director who could unite the world's greatest minds in a single, secret location to build this impossible weapon. On paper, Oppenheimer was the worst choice. He had no Nobel Prize, no management experience, and a security file filled with communist associations. But Groves saw something else. A genius with an overweening ambition. A man with a breathtakingly fast and comprehensive understanding of the entire project. Against all advice, Groves made his historic gamble. Oppenheimer would lead the lab. The secret lab needed a home, isolated and secure. Oppenheimer suggested a place he loved from his horseback riding days, a remote mesa in the desert of New Mexico, the site of the Los Alamos Ranch School. In a matter of months, a secret city was born from the dust. The greatest scientific minds in the world were brought to this isolated mesa, their existence erased. Their mail was censored, their calls monitored, all driven by a single goal: build the bomb before the Nazis. And it was here that Oppenheimer transformed. The awkward academic vanished, replaced by a leader of extraordinary power. He was everywhere at once, driving his people relentlessly, but himself even harder. He seemed to survive on martinis, cigarettes, and pure nervous energy. He had found the one stage in the world big enough for his genius. He was the conductor of a terrifying orchestra, all playing their part in a composition that would culminate in a single, deafening crescendo. The scientific challenges were monumental. They were pursuing two paths. One, a simpler gun-type design for a uranium bomb. The other, a far more complex and uncertain design for a plutonium bomb that required a perfect implosion, a sphere of plutonium crushed into a supercritical density by a perfectly symmetrical shock wave from surrounding explosives. It was this implosion gadget, the more elegant and challenging of the two, that consumed the scientists at Los Alamos. In May 1945, Germany surrendered. The original motivation for the project, the race against Hitler, was gone. The German atomic program, they discovered, had been years behind. They could have stopped, but the project had a momentum of its own, and a new terrible enemy remained: Imperial Japan. The bomb, once a deterrent, was now seen as a tool to end the war and save millions of lives. The pressure on Oppenheimer intensified. They needed to prove the implosion device would work. They needed a test. The Trinity Test, as Oppenheimer code-named it, was the culmination of 3 years of frantic work. As the countdown reached 0 that July morning, the scientists made history. Their impossible gadget had worked. Oppenheimer, the man who had willed it into existence, was met with a mixture of awe and a profound, bone-deep terror at what he had done. He was now the man who held the power of the sun in his hands. Less than a month later, on August 6, 1945, the world changed forever. The uranium bomb, Little Boy, was dropped on the city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, the plutonium implosion bomb, Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki. The war was over. The scientists at Los Alamos celebrated, their relief palpable. But for Oppenheimer, the celebration was short-lived. As the reports and photographs began to filter back from Japan, the images of vaporized cities, of tens of thousands of civilians incinerated in an instant, of the horrific burns and radiation sickness, the scientific triumph curdled into a moral nightmare. The power he had unleashed was not a clean, abstract equation. It was a firestorm that had consumed men, women, and children. The weight of this knowledge began to crush him. He became the public face of the atomic bomb, the father of this terrible new age, appearing on the covers of magazines. But privately, he was consumed by guilt. A few months after the bombings, he had the now famous meeting with President Harry T. Truman at the White House. In the Oval Office, the tortured physicist looked at the man who had given the order and said, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman, a pragmatist who never expressed a shred of doubt about his decision, was disgusted by what he saw as weakness. He reportedly told his aides afterward, "I don't want to see that son of a bitch in this office ever again." This marked the beginning of Oppenheimer's
fall from grace. He had created the ultimate weapon, but he refused to blindly endorse its continued development. He used his fame and influence to advocate fiercely for international control of nuclear energy, for transparency, and for a world where these weapons would never be used again. His most significant stand was his staunch opposition to the development of the next, even more terrifying weapon, the hydrogen bomb, or the super, a device 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. His stance put him in direct conflict with powerful figures in the American government and military, including his old Manhattan Project colleague, Edward Teller, the primary champion of the H-bomb. In the paranoid, anti-communist hysteria of the Cold War and the McCarthy era, Oppenheimer's pre-war associations with communists, once overlooked, were now unearthed and weaponized against him. He was seen not as a cautious patriot, but as a disloyal and dangerous subversive. In 1954, at the height of the Red Scare, J. Robert Oppenheimer, the hero of the Manhattan Project, was dragged before a security hearing. It was not a trial, but a public humiliation. His security clearance was at stake. For weeks, he was subjected to a brutal cross-examination. His entire life was picked apart. His scientific opinions, his political associations, his personal indiscretions. In the most devastating betrayal of all, several of his former scientific colleagues, including Edward Teller, testified against him, questioning his judgment and his loyalty. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. The committee declared that while he was a loyal citizen, he was a security risk. His clearance was revoked. The man who had given America the atomic bomb was now deemed unfit to be trusted with its secrets. He was publicly shamed, cast out from the very corridors of power he had helped to build. The government he had served had broken him. Oppenheimer, the Promethean figure who had stolen fire from the gods, was now chained to his rock, punished not for his transgression, but for his subsequent attempt at morality. He spent the rest of his life in a kind of quiet exile. He returned to academia, directing the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, but he never again worked for the U.S. government. He was a shadow of his former self, a man haunted by his past, a living symbol of the terrible paradoxes of the atomic age. He had led the greatest scientific project in history. He had brought an end to a world war. But in doing so, he had opened Pandora's box, and the mushroom cloud would forever cast a shadow over his name and his conscience. He was the man who had seen the face of destruction because he had created it. He was the man who had become death, and in a way, he spent the rest of his life trying to outrun the destroyer of worlds he saw in his own reflection.